60 Minutes Rewind.
The thousands of young men who graduated this week from the nation's service academies must be spending a quiet moment of reflection this weekend, for these have not been good years for the armed services. Vietnam heaped disillusion, even contempt on military service. The new volunteer army has been less than a success. Military budgets are under a scrutiny they have never before been subject to. And now, adding to their troubles, a young Air Force captain has made a direct hit on the very foundation of the American military establishment. Captain Mike Rose is a lawyer, a regular officer, graduate of the Air Force Academy and New York University Law School. And what he did was write a long paper, exhaustively researched, in the prestigious NYU Law Review. It brought down upon him the full wrath of his military superiors. The Law Review article, entitled A Prayer for Relief, focused on the ways cadets at the service academies are disciplined and punished, on the conduct codes administered by officers, and on the honor codes run by the cadets themselves. It cited hundreds of examples where cadets' constitutional guarantees were abused, where even the rules of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the basic law governing all servicemen, were being violated. The article told of accused cadets not having counsel to help in their defense, of not being able to question, or in some cases even listen to witnesses against them, of not being able to challenge judges or juries for bias, of being tried and in some cases expelled from the academies for alleged offenses committed off base while on leave, of punishment longer than allowed by the Uniform Code, and it cited examples where the same officer acted as prosecutor, trial judge, and appeals judge in a single case. Captain Rose suggested that proceedings were kangaroo courts, star chambers, where cadets were harassed and coerced into resigning from the academy, in some cases for minor, even trivial offenses. The case he cited that drew the most public notice was that of West Point cadet James Palosi, accused of continuing to write after an exam had ended. His conviction of an honor code violation was thrown out by an officer board for lack of evidence. Nevertheless, he spent his remaining 2 years as a pariah. He was given the silence.
I was compelled to live in a room by myself and to eat at a table in the cadet dining hall by myself. If I attended any lectures, the seats on either side of me were supposed to be vacated. If I went to a dance, I wasn't permitted to associate with the cadets or cut in on another cadet. And if I went to any of the cadet restaurants, I wouldn't be permitted to sit down at a table with other cadets. That was the way the rule was set up.
The silence, largely as a result of the Law Review article, has now been outlawed. A Prayer for Relief concludes that it's no more logical for officers and cadets untrained in the law to judge crimes and offenses than it would be to have cadets treat each other for medical problems. And it warns that the system fosters a contempt for the law and basic civil rights. Its author is a 26-year-old Army brat from Charleston, South Carolina, a graduate of the Air Force Academy. Mike Rose, it could be said, was a straight arrow, an unquestioning, ambitious young lieutenant when he left the academy. He wanted to become a judge advocate, a lawyer for the Air Force. He was given leave to study at NYU, where he received high honors and was named to the Law Review, where he was assigned to make a study of justice in the military academies.
In January 1972, during the Air Force Academy's third cheating scandal, between midnight and 6 a.m., over 100 cadets were gotten out of bed, put in rooms by themselves with 5 to 12 people interrogating them, screaming at them, threatening them with court-martial if they didn't confess, saying there were signed statements outside implicating them, so they might as well confess. Sometimes that wasn't even true. Now, the highest general cannot interrogate the lowest enlisted man in that manner. Now, what's worse than what happened to those cadets who were interrogated in the middle of the night that way is that the people who interrogated them are now lieutenants in the Air Force. Their notions of what's fundamentally fair, of what the law requires, their relationship to society and so on, are shaped by what they learned at the academy. And now they've learned, and they still feel, that if we've identified somebody as being dishonorable or being guilty of an offense, in our opinion, then we can treat them like this.
Well, what have you been able to determine as the effect of this attitude in the military, particularly the military vis-a-vis the civilian administration of this country?
The honor system of the military and Air Force academies breed an attitude of moral superiority. Now, you got to understand that a cadet enters the academy and he's told repeatedly over and over, you're the cream of the crop, the hope of tomorrow, America's future. You've gone through a very stiff selection process to get here, and specifically told that the morals of the country are degenerating around them, and it's only the positive, assertive leadership of the long gray line that's going to save the country. And you spend hours talking about the meaning of honor and ethics, which is very fine, but it gets to be such a precise definition of honor and ethics, and you compare yourselves to those civilians who have not had the benefit of your training, and you start feeling that your moral judgments are superior to the civilian. The people who are running the military that I've interacted with not only have distrust for civilians, but it's actually a contempt, an absolute contempt.
What is the impact of this attitude that's inculcated once people get into positions of command?
The impact in command is that they have got thoroughly ingrained in them at the academies that the requirements of regulations and law and procedures and so on are just technicalities that stand in their way, and if they can do it, they'll just ignore it.
In short, what you're saying is that it is this attitude and this training that enables men to lie, say, to congressional committees about bombing in Cambodia, enables men to lie or cover up over a massacre like My Lai.
That's right. It's a combination of the extreme sense of super loyalty, where your loyalty really, even if you don't realize it, is to the unit, to the military, and protection of the military's image, and not to the Constitution, and not to principles in their own right. The military doesn't act, they react, and the way they have reacted and overreacted demonstrates how their prime consideration really was how the group's image appears, and not sitting back detachedly and looking at what the law might say and saying, well, if we apply the law, if it makes us look bad, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. They don't do that.
But isn't the military, including military academies, isn't the military by its very nature an undemocratic society? Don't you have to have in the military an atmosphere where just because you do have bars or stars or eagles on your shoulder, people are going to have to snap to at almost every whim?
I don't dispute that. I mean, no one that I know disputes that for a moment. I'm saying that it's qualitatively different to require discipline within the military and to require prompt obedience and strict obedience to orders on the one hand, and to afford fair procedures in a judicial context on the other hand.
The story will continue after this.
Mike Rose's future with the Air Force is, to say the least, cloudy. His orders to act as an Air Force lawyer have been canceled. And not surprisingly, for in 1971, he brought a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act seeking Air Force documents for his law review study. You, were you a captain then?
No, I was lieutenant then.
You, Lieutenant Rose, sued the Secretary of the Air Force, right?
And the superintendent of the Air Force Academy and the commandant of cadets of the Air Force Academy and the major who was the officer advisor to the Cadet Honor Committee at the Air Force Academy. That's right. It was unprecedented and it was called frivolous, et cetera, but we won. But everything turned after that. There's no question. I was perceived as being disloyal, disgruntled. I'm up in New York City. They don't like lawyers anyway. Just causing trouble, and I'm associating with left-wing radicals from the Ivy League schools, et cetera, and that was their attitude. What it came down to was just a gut reaction of you've got to be for us or against us, and no one is to question our system, and it really galled them. You know, they can understand left-wing radicals who are against the war and so on, questioning their system, but what really galled them, and I mean galled them, was to have a regular officer doing it.
I've got here your last efficiency report, which says excellent knowledge of all phases of his job. Your work is superior, timely, exceptionally fine overall evaluation. And the base commander says Captain Rose, a willing, able officer with excellent potential. I'm sure it'd be of great value to the office of the staff judge advocate, i.e. an Air Force lawyer, and to my command in the future. How does that square, that efficiency report, with what the Air Force says now, that you're lacking in those qualities of judgment, maturity, objectivity, and ability to identify with the Air Force mission? What do they say when you point up that discrepancy?
Well, first of all, they don't say anything to me. They didn't even tell me that my lack of objectivity and so on was the reason. Repeatedly, I asked to be informed for weeks of why I was being removed. And their attitude was, in effect, we don't have to answer to him.
Do you want to stay in the Air Force?
At this point, I don't.
Does the Air Force want you to stay in?
Not at all. The problem is that the military higher-ups really cannot admit imperfection. They cannot say, no matter how much the evidence shows it, that, sorry, we made a mistake. If they had done that in My Lai, just imagine in My Lai saying, American public, we're sorry this happened, we don't condone it. You got to expect those kind of things in war. We can't control everything, but we'll turn it over to the courts. People would have bought that. They really realized that that's inherent war, but what they couldn't respect was a cover-up.
Captain Rose has submitted his resignation, and it looks as though the Air Force will not press to make him serve out his 5 years. You've probably guessed by now that the Air Force has refused to be interviewed on the subject of Captain Rose, but a couple of U.S. senators, Bayh and Proxmire, have asked the General Accounting Office to investigate the case.